Hello friends, I'm Father Wade Menezes of the Fathers of Mercy. The proper placement of the tabernacle within the church building is crucial because its prominence illustrates precisely what we Catholics believe about the Eucharist, that it is the real, true, and abiding presence of our Lord Jesus Christ. Pope Benedict XVI's apostolic exhortation, Sacramentum Caritatis, provides a nice summation of all that the Church teaches concerning the proper placement of the tabernacle since the Second Vatican Council. The Holy Father states that in churches which do not have a Blessed Sacrament chapel and where the high altar with its tabernacle is still in place, it is appropriate to continue to use this structure for the reservation and adoration of the Eucharist, taking care not to place the celebrant's chair in front of it. In new churches, it is good to position the Blessed Sacrament chapel close to the sanctuary, and where this is not possible, it is preferable to locate the tabernacle in the sanctuary in a sufficiently elevated place at the center of the apse area, or in another place where it will be equally conspicuous. Attention to these considerations, the Holy Father continues, will lend dignity to the tabernacle, which must always be cared for. As faithful Catholics, we know that the correct positioning of the tabernacle contributes to recognition of Christ's real presence in the Most Blessed Sacrament. Where the Holy Eucharist is reserved should be a place readily visible to everyone upon entering a Catholic church or chapel, and not some obscure location. And a sanctuary lamp, a living, real flame signifying our Lord's real presence, should mark it. God bless you, and thank you for watching EWTN.
How is Mass like a food truck, and how do you get more out of it? Some people approach Mass as if it's fine dining, and they leave Mass driving home with their kids, rating the experience. The homily was a little stale, the music was a little spicy. You are absolutely missing the point. Mass is not like fine dining, it's more like a food truck. Now, insofar as Mass is absolutely sacred, it's nothing like a food truck. But insofar as it's God pulling up into your life to fuel you to get back to work, it's exactly like a food truck. This is not just so you'd rate the experience, and God isn't just giving you all His grace and power just so you'd enjoy it. He's giving you all this to send you into the world. In fact, the whole Mass takes its name from the last words of Mass in Latin, ite missa est. Missa means sent, and it sounds like mission for a reason. It's the words a Roman commander would use when sending his army on a mission. Guys, 2/3 of God's name is go. He's fueling you up to send you. Pier Giorgio Frassati used to receive our Lord in Holy Communion every day, and then he'd go and serve the poor. And he said, God comes to me in the Eucharist, and I go to him in the poor. You want to get more out of Mass? Ask God when you're at Mass, Lord, who are you sending me to? When you make it not about you, you get more out of it. Isn't it funny how that works?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We have a terrific show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening, so let's get right to it. Pope Francis made a 2-day apostolic visit to Greece and Cyprus last week. Joining me now to analyze some of the papal statements and much more is the papal posse, editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray, both on the road this week for shame. Thank you, gents, for being with us. Now, during Pope Francis's visit to Greece last week, he warned against a retreat from democracy. He said, democracy demands hard work and patience. it is complex, whereas authoritarianism is peremptory, and populism's easy answers appear attractive. Bob, what do you make of this, particularly at a time when liberal democracies seem to be pretty authoritarian these days?
Yeah, look, his general point, of course, is correct. On the one hand, he said you want to avoid empires. It's like, I think actually the term he used, and he's in the home of the birthplace of democracy in Greece. And so, yes, that internationalism that we're all worried about, that seems to be pushing aside all our national traditions, that is something worth warning about. And then also the kind of authoritarianism. There are various kinds of authoritarianism. We're seeing a lot of authoritarianism from the left these days here in the United States and in most of Europe. So, in broad terms, what he said is okay. The problem is it seems to me that of course, it's easy to set up, I don't want to necessarily call them straw men, but these extremes without naming any names. And so, yeah, it's worth warning us. But what exactly it applies to, it's very difficult to say. And look, let's face it, there is a crisis of democracy in this country. There is one also in Europe and in other places around the world. And we're slowly trying to figure our way out to a new moment in our politics, in our economics, and in our moral cultural realm as well. So it's a good warning. I don't know that it gets us very far, but at least he put it out there.
Yeah. Also in Greece, Pope Francis was met with some antagonism. An elderly Greek Orthodox priest heckled Pope Francis as he headed into a meeting with the Orthodox Archbishop in Athens. Watch this. Father Jerry, that Orthodox priest was calling the Pope a heretic. Is this part of the old mistrust that still exists between Catholic and the Orthodox Church, or is something else at play here?
It's not immediately evident, Raymond, what's happening now. It is true that some of the Orthodox Christians still have a hostile attitude toward Roman Catholicism and would call us heretics. That could be at play. But who knows? He may be referring to other things that he doesn't agree with the Pope on. But certainly that kind of behavior is unacceptable. The Pope is the guest of the Greek Orthodox bishops there, going in to meet with them. So that behavior was completely out of bounds.
Yeah. Later in the journey, the Pope addressed one of his, really it's a theme of his pontificate, migration and migrants. In Nicosia, he said that the God was encouraging a dream of humanity free from walls of division and hostility, where there are no longer strangers, but only fellow citizens. Now, Bob, this has been a customary theme of Pope Francis, as I've said, welcoming the migrant, which is certainly part of church teaching. But this sounds like a plea for open borders.
Yeah, and he got some pushback. You may have seen in the reports that the Archbishop of Athens and Greece, I think that's the right term, or the Metropolitan of Athens and all Greece, said to him that he warned that Turkey is using migration as a weapon against Greece. Now, Greece itself, of course, is a part of the West. It's a democracy. It's got a lot of economic problems and has for many years. And a kind of uncontrolled arrival, especially of problematic, I think we have to say this bluntly, Muslim arrival in the West in small numbers is absorbable. We do it here in the United States, and some other countries do it as well. But a country like Greece, Italy, I think, is in the same circumstance. France and England have much larger waves of migration that come into them. I think that the Greek patriarch, if I've got his title correct, was right in saying to him, look, this is also a political question, that the Turks are trying to overwhelm us with these refugees from the Middle East. We can't simply have open borders because our society and our economy are already troubled. And for him to make this broad statement, it's true. It's theologically true. We have to worry about refugees and migrants and whatnot. But the prudence of what can happen in any set of circumstances is much more complicated. So I think that the Greek leader was right to remind him about that. And I wish that this would penetrate a bit into the Vatican, because they just seem to be so sort of monochromatically fixed on this idea that we must accept all available refugees and migrants, that it isn't very helpful in practical terms.
Well, it's a one-size-fits-all solution that doesn't apply in pockets of the world, Greece being a good example. Moving on to the end of the visit, Pope Francis stumbled, Father Jerry, briefly ascending the stairs of the papal plane when he began his trip back to Rome. This brings up a subject of the Pope's health, which is making the rounds of the news this week. I saw a number of articles, including a report by veteran journalist John Gizzi, writing for Newsmax. He says that his source at the Vatican told him that Francis is, quote, dying and not expected to live past 2022. Your thoughts on the veracity of this report? I mean, we've all heard this kind of rumor. I get a little squeamish when I see it in print and people start pushing it as if it's, established truth without any real fact pattern here.
Sure. This is based on the Pope's age, on the fact that he had that surgery earlier this year for in his intestines, had part of his intestines removed. But nobody knows how long the Pope is going to live and how long most people are going to live. Certainly, we're all concerned about the Pope's health. It's painful to see him. I know his sciatica it pains him, and it's painful for us to see him suffering as he's walking up the aisle at St. Peter's and the like. But I think it's rash and sensationalistic to say that the Vatican is preparing for the next conclave because everybody there expects the Pope to die. We just don't know when that's going to happen. What we should be doing is praying for him that he get all the best medical attention and be able to have his sciatica relieved and any other problems dealt with in the best way possible.
Bob, is it appropriate to report on the health of a pope?
Well, I think it is, but I agree with Father that there can be a kind of a sensationalism here. As you rightly say, we've all heard these rumors that he has a cancer or other things that are going around. And it hasn't been reported anywhere else because, first of all, we're all going to die someday. It's just a matter of when. And even with the best medical knowledge, you can't entirely predict when a person is going to die. And to me, he looked, despite that fall, he still looks fairly robust. So I just think it's kind of, you want to be cautious in reporting these sorts of things. Let's face it, the Pope is not like a secular authority figure. If Joe Biden were, he obviously shows some signs of dementia, but if Joe Biden were at the point where he could not carry out his duties, we would all want to know about that because he's a public figure. The Pope occupies a different space. So it's a little bit sensitive to decide when you report on this and when you don't. But I myself would err on the side of reticence because he's a different type of figure. And until we have some really solid information about what's going on, all this is just speculation.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. You need a fact pattern here. You need to know what is exactly going on, and sources close to the action who can share that. I don't see any of that. I see kind of sensational headlines and Roman gossip, but give me a couple of gelato and a plate of pasta, and I could probably get the same story. Pope Francis late last week accepted the resignation of Paris Archbishop Michel Aupetit, who offered to quit over a questionable relationship with a woman back in 2012. Now, though the cleric has vigorously denied any physical relationship with a woman, the Pope quickly accepted the resignation because of rumors of an illicit relationship. They claimed they were too damaging. Father, your thoughts? There have been a number of clerics who have offered resignations for different reasons. The Pope is usually reticent to accept those, even from bishops who failed to move quickly against sexual abusers. Why accept this resignation?
Well, there's a lot of mystery here, Raymond, and a lot of unsatisfactory things going on. The whole story basically is that the Archbishop of Paris had sent an email last year in which he inadvertently revealed to members of his staff a relationship which dated back to when he was Vicar General in Paris. And that led to the nuncio being informed. The Vatican commissioned Cardinal Vantois to do an investigation, but none of that was really known outside of the Paris Chancery until Le Point newspaper, or magazine rather, reported on it last week. And that led to denial by the Archbishop. And then he said, well, the relationship with the secretary was ambiguous. What that means, we're not quite sure. And then very surprisingly, when the Pope accepted the resignation, he was asked about it, and he started describing the nature of the accusations, including that the Archbishop had committed caresses or engaged in caresses and massages of the secretary. It's a female secretary, so it was a laywoman who worked in his office. And everybody was surprised because that was not known publicly. And then the Pope, in addition, started minimalizing the nature of that kind of behavior, which for most people would say, well, you don't give massages to your secretary. That's workplace harassment. And it certainly is a leading indicator, we could say, that perhaps other behavior is going on. We hope not. And he's denied that there was any sexual component. So what we have here is workplace sexual harassment, quite clearly, according to current legal standards. But then the Pope accepting a resignation while saying he's doing this on the altar not of truth, but of hypocrisy. But the hypocrisy is not quite clear. What are we talking about here? This is public pressure.
Yeah, he's claiming it was the gossip and, the hypocrisy of those making the charges, and that this really isn't all that bad. But then he accepts the resignation. Bob, your reaction?
Yeah, I think I was kind of disturbed. He said that, these are the sins of the flesh, which are not the most serious sins. Right. Now, I don't know if it's right for a pope to be saying things like this. I often, when I teach Dante, point out to the students that the sexual sins are the lightest sins for which a person can be damned. And the reason is, of course, because it's kind of an interpersonal love that takes place, and it's a mistaken type of love that is expressed. But to say that, they're not, the sexual sins are not the worst sins, when in fact they're the most common ones. There's a reason why those sins of incontinence, the sexual sins, greed, gluttony, etc., are warned against, because most of us are not going to commit murder or suicide or felonies or fraud, whatever they might be. These are the places where people get weak. And I have to say, I can't imagine any previous pope saying about a sexual misconduct that it's not the worst thing. There's nowhere in the gospel where Jesus ever says that any sin is minor. He may forgive somebody and say, go and sin no more, but he never just says, well, it's not the worst of the sins. That's really a very poor standard to set, and I wish he did
and Father
not
Jerry,
say that.
Yeah, Father Jerry, as you pointed out, the Pope said, and I'll read the quote, he said this was small caresses and a massage given to his secretary, speaking of the Archbishop of Paris, before he was the Archbishop of Paris. He says there is a sin there, this is the Pope, but not the worst kind. He also added, sins of the flesh are not the most serious, ranking pride and hatred higher. Father, if these sorts of sins are not such a big deal, why accept the resignation? What's the message here, quickly?
I guess the message here is that public pressure works, and that the Pope must have been convinced that this was serious enough to take his resignation, even though saying it wasn't that serious, which again poses a problem, because if the man is being unjustly punished, it's being done by his superior in the church, which is something we're not supposed to do. Or, as I see it, what he did was completely unacceptable, and it's a good thing he resigned, because we don't want the Archbishop of Paris to be someone that people don't trust. He took the nomination as Bishop of Paris knowing about this previous behavior. That's putting the whole church at risk if it ever comes public. So I think the outcome is satisfactory, but as Bob was saying, the papal comments were regrettable, sad to say.
Yeah, we should also say that the Archbishop claims there was no physical contact aside, there was no intimacies. It was restricted to the things the Pope described. So, I mean, this is, considering some who continue to hold positions of power in the church, who have done far, more explicit, engaged in far more explicit activities, I was a bit taken back by the resignation, I have to say. Also causing some controversy this week, in correspondence this year with the notorious Catholic LGBT activist group New Ways Ministry. Pope Francis commended the group for its work, referring to Sister Janine Gramick as a valiant woman. Well, in 1999, the CDF declared Gramick and her colleague, Father Robert Nugent, were to cease their ministry due to ambiguities and errors in their outreach. Now, this was signed by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Father, why is the Pope apparently praising this group, who has been officially sanctioned? They also removed them from the Vatican Synod website this week. So there's a lot of talk about mixed messaging. Here we go again.
This is on a par with the Pope sending a letter to Father James Martin, praising him for his outreach work to people with a homosexual problem. This is mystifying and really, in a sense, infuriating, because Sister Gramick and her organization, New Ways Ministry, have not changed anything about their approach since they were condemned by Cardinal Ratzinger back, during the pontificate of John Paul II. This is what causes confusion and really despair to a degree among Catholics who are trying to uphold the moral order, that someone who's promoting homosexual activity, same-sex marriage, things that are completely anathema and immoral, that they're getting a letter of praise from the Pope. I think the Pope was very ill-advised, made a terrible mistake in writing, because Sister Gramick's condemnation was never withdrawn, and she's never repented from the things that she was rightly accused and found to have, in fact, committed, which is to take Catholic doctrine and toss it aside in favor of basically a secularistic, liberal sexual ethics, which is just terrible, terrible.
Yeah, the New Ways Ministries website was listed on the Vatican Synodal website. They were removed this week after, I guess, they were made aware of the Bishops' Conference in the United States condemning the group. So interesting how this is shaking out. But again, the mixed messaging is very confusing to the Catholic in the pew. The National Catholic Register's Ed Penton is reporting this week on that ongoing financial scandal trial at the Vatican. He reports that last month, Pope Francis was mentioned by a key witness during the proceedings, claiming that Francis squashed reportage of the extortion attempts alleged to have been committed by the key witness himself. Now, Bob, this begs a question. How much did the Pope know about this scandal, and when did he know it?
Yeah, this is a very complicated, financial transactions are always very complicated. And as we keep seeing, we keep unwinding one part of it and unwinding another, and it points in one direction and then another. This is the first, for a long time, Archbishop Perlasca, who's the one you were just speaking about, was sort of held out of the testimony. And then he came forward. We don't know if he was induced to come forward or he was given assurances that he would not himself be prosecuted. But this is the first indication that we have that it didn't just go up to the Vatican Secretary of State and that the Pope himself may have been involved. I mean, that said, we don't know that this means anything sinister. It may just mean that he was asked to sign off on this, and it was a large investment of money in a property in London. It looked like a good investment because London real estate prices were very hot at the time. And maybe he had to come in and sign off on something that large. We just don't know. But it's remarkable that when we start to trace down a problem like this, we think it's a bunch of lower level officials, and now it leads right up to the Holy Father. And let's hope that this trial sorts things out fairly for everybody concerned.
Father, how does this revelation affect the case canonically? I asked Cardinal Pell last week, how can the public have confidence in the justice of this court if the Pope is changing the rules constantly? And he's done it, I think, 4 times now. The rules have slightly adjusted, and the Pope has kind of weighed in on the case.
Well, the problem that Ed Penton identified here is that this Monsignor Perlasca, who had signed off on a $15 million payoff to the guy who was extorting the money, who's been accused, he says that he did that under instructions from higher authority, meaning the Pope. And there's a question of backdated authorizations. There's a question of the prosecutor interviewed the Pope but then none of those details, no transcript of the questions and answers was ever provided to the defense. So what we have here is a case where, in fact, the Pope is been implicated in what basically was a decision not to bring the bribe, not to bring the offender to justice by suing him in court, but rather paying him off 15 million euros so that the Vatican can get control over a property that he was supposed to be buying on behalf of the Vatican, not on behalf of himself. So, as Bob said, very complicated, but trust will be restored if the court proceedings follow accepted standards of Western justice, which is the prosecution and the defense have equal access to all the evidence, and that witnesses who give testimony in the form of depositions are then brought into court and questioned so that we can compare their answers then and now to try and arrive at justice. But it's mysterious because, as you mentioned, the Pope, for instance, Monsignor Palaska was given amnesty, essentially. He would not be prosecuted if he became a witness. But in American cases, you don't give amnesty before someone testifies. You wait till they testify, and then you say if you testify honestly and accurately, then you'll be given either a reduced sentence or whatever. So as an observer without full knowledge, all I can say is I hope this plays out in accord with what we expect to happen in a modern Western courtroom.
Before we run out of time, news broke this week from China that Catholic businessman and democracy activist Jimmy Lai has been convicted, as expected, by the Chinese Communist government for participating in a vigil marking the Tiananmen Square massacre. Father Jerry, then Bob, very quickly, your thoughts on what this means for freedom in Hong Kong. And I ask you both to quickly weigh in. President Biden said we're going to have a diplomatic boycott of the upcoming Olympics in China. Does that go far enough?
Well, let's, number one, about Jimmy Lai, pray for him. He is a good man. He was doing what anybody else does in a free Western country or any free society, which is demonstrate with your fellow citizens to get your point across. No, Communist China has shut down Hong Kong as a free part of China, and this is what they do. The Chinese communists are completely untrustworthy, and for the United States to make a boycott at the diplomatic boycott at the Olympics is praiseworthy. I praise the president for that, but we got to be stronger because we don't want symbolic action simply. More reports are coming out of the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in China. Why isn't this making people more aware that the Chinese Communist government has to be told, if you want to do business in the modern world, you can't act like this brutal dictatorship that you are. Change the way you act. So let's hope there's some of that.
Bob, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Lai is a hero. He is really one of the great living human beings, I believe. He could have fled the country as they were starting to crack down on democratic voices in China, and he chose not to. He chose to stay there and face the music. So, I mean, we have to really pray for him and praise him and bring him up whenever we possibly can. I think that the diplomatic boycott is very weak. I suppose you can say it's a good thing, but if I were the Chinese, frankly, I would be saying, good. We won't have to bother with those American diplomats when they're here. They don't like it because it's kind of an insult to their, to their dignity. But really, China, we're seeing more and more that China is going to be a real threat in the world. And they don't really care very much about what the rest of the world does. And we have to factor that into account when we're dealing with them.
Yeah, diplomatic boycott, I think, is not nearly as strong as a media boycott. NBC and others broadcasting these games should shut out all coverage of it, and then they should stop trading with them in any way until they repair their human rights and religious rights record and set people like Jimmy Lai free. We'll leave it there, gentlemen. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, you can visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both. Congressman Jim Jordan is up next. But first, as many of you know, I've been on the Spider Who Saved Christmas book tour. It's been amazing seeing so many of you, talking with you in Dallas last week. It was just incredible. The next stop is Saturday, December 11th, back home in New Orleans. I'll be at the Barnes & Noble in Metairie. I hope you all will come out. The final stop on the tour will be Saturday, December 18th at Veritas Books in Houston, Texas. I'd love to see you all. I'll share some stories, we'll talk, I'll take questions, and of course, signed copies of The Spider Who Saved Christmas. It makes a great Christmas gift. Visit RaymondArroyo.com for all the dates, locations, times, etc. See you there. In Washington, the White House is warning Russia about invading Ukraine, and at the Capitol, there's a looming debt ceiling deadline. To get into this and much more is the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee and the author of the new book, Do What You Said You Would Do, Fighting for Freedom in the Swamp. Please welcome Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan to the program. Congressman, thanks for being here. But before we get into the book, I need your thoughts on a few of these issues. A federal judge in Georgia blocked President Biden's vaccine mandate for federal contractors this week. Here's what White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki had to say. Watch.
We are confident in our ability legally to make these happen across the country. The Department of Justice will vigorously defend this in court, but we know it works. That's why the president and the administration will continue pressing forward.
Congressman, how much more pressing can this administration do exactly?
Yeah, well, I mean, she said she's confident. They've lost just about every court action, every decision that's happened on this issue. I mean, they lost in the Fifth Circuit. I think there's a good chance they lose in the Sixth Circuit, where they're combining some of these. They've lost on the contractor issue. They've lost on the over 100 employees. So they can keep saying they're confident, just like Secretary Mayorkas said, the border's secure. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, we don't see. Just like Joe Biden said, if you spend more money, if you spend $2 trillion more money, it'll help inflation. Oh, right, really? So no one believes what these folks say. The good news is freedom seems to be winning in the courts, which we always thought was going to happen. Let's hope we continue to get these decisions and freedom prevails.
As a federal judge tossed out Biden's mandate, as you mentioned, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio issued a mandate, the first of its kind in the nation. Private sector employees have to be vaccinated by December 27th. He called it a preemptive strike. Is that legal? I know a judge just halted his mandate for city workers.
I don't think it is, but it's certainly crazy. I mean, you think what I said this the other day, the American people want safe cities, affordable gas, and freedom. Instead, we get record crime, record inflation, and Dr. Fauci. I mean, so this is more Fauciism or whatever you want to call it, but it's more of an encroachment on our First Amendment liberties, our privacy rights, and everything else. So again, if you want more people from New York to continue to move to Florida, Mayor de Blasio, I guess you keep doing crazy things like this. We all know the virus is serious. We have certainly treated it that way over the last 20-some months. Everyone understands that, but we also respect the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, and this thing called freedom. So, look, we'll see how it shakes out. But I think the courts are going to prevail in the right freedom direction.
Congressman, the perplexing thing is we're learning that it seems this Omicron variant that was so ballyhooed is actually not as deadly as the Delta variant. Why the doubling down on these mandates and triple boosters, now 4 boosters, Pfizer is saying? I mean, where does this end?
Yeah, I mean, especially in light of, if mask mandates and lockdowns work, why don't they work? I mean, we've done that. That's all we've done for 20-some months, particularly in Democrat-run jurisdictions. So, yeah, I don't see the common sense. I think the American people are way past it. What was it? Last Saturday was the biggest day in college football. All the conferences, championship games, game after game after game was on TV, and I didn't see one mask anywhere in packed stadiums all across our great country. But somehow the left, who now controls the Democrat Party and Democrat elected officials, keep wanting to go to the same old playbook: mask mandates and lockdowns. Again, if they work, why don't they work? So this makes no sense. The courts see it for what it is. The American people see it for what it is. Unfortunately, the Democrats don't. But I think the American people are getting ready to give them a rude awakening in the midterm elections next November.
Congressman, the House recently passed a bill for a COVID vaccine database. Now, you voted no, but 80 House Republicans voted yes, including Representative Dan Crenshaw, who's calling critics of the vote, quote, liars and grifters. Your reaction, and why did you vote against it?
Well, I'm just concerned in light of all we just talked about. Do we really need this kind of coordination with state databases? So the folks who voted for it say, well, it's not really a central database, but there's this coordination.
Right.
Do we really need in the world of Fauci? So I think there were many of us we're kind of reluctant to go there. I'm not going to criticize my colleagues who voted a different way. I think they're wrong. I think the position we took was right. I think what we see from the left, as we've talked about, is so ridiculous. So I'm just in a world of Dr. Fauci, who never put his name on a ballot, has never ran for office, but seems to be the most powerful guy in the executive branch of our government. I was just reluctant to go there. And so we voted no, and so did so many others. And we got to continue to push back against this ever-growing bureaucracy where they have more ability to figure out what we're doing, watch what we're doing, coming after us if they don't like it, like what the stinking Justice Department is doing right now, going after moms and dads who are simply standing up for their kids' education. So that was my overall concern.
Yeah. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments this week in a case that may test the limits of religious freedom. Carson versus Mackin is a challenge to a program in Maine that pays some students to attend private schools, but excludes schools that provide religious instruction. Your thoughts on the case quickly, and the Biden working group, Congressman, on expanding the court. They finally issued their recommendations. They decided and announced that they were undecided.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's because everyone knows you shouldn't expand the court. To your last point, shouldn't expand the court, but because of the radical left and the Democrat Party, as I said, that controls the party, they want to do all kinds of ridiculous things, like add 4 justices. I always think it's interesting. Why 4? Well, because that would give them a majority on the court. Why not 1, 2, 3, or 10? No, just 4, because that gives them a majority. Everyone knows that's ridiculous, changing the rules midway. Let's hope that doesn't happen. On the issue of education, I'm to the point where I don't think Americans should vote for any candidate, Republican or Democrat. Don't vote for any candidate who's not for school choice, who's not for empowering parents, moms and dads, and saying to parents, you know best what for your children's education. You know what's best for your kids' education. You should be in control where you want them to go, and the money should follow the student to a religious school, to a non-religious school, whatever school you think best suits your kids' needs and will help them get the education they need to achieve the American dream.
Congressman, you mentioned it earlier. We've heard the stories about a possible federal crackdown on parents who demand answers and input into their kids' learning. In your capacity as a ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, I know you wanted a subpoena issued to the National School Boards Association demanding answers about the Biden administration's attempt to target parents who simply want those answers. What do you hope to find out, and what actions can the committee take to protect these parents if that becomes necessary?
Well, Raymond, we tried to issue a subpoena. Understand, we can't. Only the Democrats can. They're in power. We tried to bring it up as an agenda item in the committee hearing, saying, call this up. They wouldn't allow us to call it up because we want those documents of communication between the School Board Association and the Biden administration. Understand this. September 29th, a letter goes to Joe Biden saying, go after parents, use the Patriot Act, treat them as domestic terrorists. 2 days later, the lady who wrote that letter, Viola Garcia, gets a plum assignment at the Department of Education on this board. 3 days after that letter was sent, you already have Tim Langen, Director of Counterterrorism at the FBI, talking with the Justice Department on how to implement the letter that was just sent 4 days earlier. 5 days after the letter is sent, October 4th, Merrick Garland actually does a memo which implements everything the School Board Association asked the Biden administration to do. All that happens in 5 days. Now, ask yourself a question, Raymond. You've watched Washington before. When have you ever seen the federal government move that fast? Which tells me one important thing, scary thing, actually. This thing really didn't start with the School Boards Association. It didn't go this direction. It went this direction. The government was looking for a pretext to go after moms and dads who were standing up, speaking out against this curriculum. And they wanted the letter as the pretext, much like the Comey FBI used the dossier as the pretext to go after President Trump's campaign and spy on them. That is the scariest thing I've seen in this town, where you get some reason, some excuse to do what you want to do, which is to go after your political opponents. That's why we want the information. That's why we want to dig into this issue and stop the Justice Department from doing what we know they're now doing based on what a whistleblower has told us.
Speaking of targeting political opponents, I want to talk to you briefly, and you address this in your new book. This entire January 6th Select Committee, it's now probing into various aspects of the people who were there, who wasn't there. They issued a subpoena against Mark Meadows, whom you know well. Meadows is saying, no, I have to preserve executive privilege here, and he's not cooperating. In fact, he's suing Nancy Pelosi. Here's my question. Didn't the FBI already do an investigation of January 6th and determine there was no coordination, or did I misread that?
No, you're exactly right. And that is God bless you, that's the fundamental point. But this committee doesn't care because it's political. Democrats have nothing else to talk about. They can't talk about the border. They can't talk about inflation. They can't talk about crime. They can't talk about the Afghanistan exit. They can't talk about anything except this, because everything else has been a disaster. Look, there are three people who have just the executive privilege with the president, the three top people, the National Security Director, the White House counsel, and the chief of staff. And I would argue of those three, the chief of staff is the one closest to the president. And this executive privilege precedent, which has been a part of our country for 200 plus years, the Democrats are going to just eviscerate it. This is wrong where they're going. But frankly, as I've said many times, if they're going to cross this bridge, if they're going to go there, if it's good for one side, it is good for the other. I don't think we should. I hope we don't. But if they do, and understand, Mark was willing to talk to them. He said, I'll answer questions that aren't part of that executive privilege that exists with those top three people in the White House working for a president. And they said, no, you're going to have to answer every single question we ask, regardless of whether it encroaches on executive privilege. And Mark said, I just can't do that. That violates the fundamental principles of our great country.
Yeah, we'll see where this goes. Tensions are escalating, as you know, between Russia and Ukraine. Russian troops have moved along their border there. President Biden and Putin held a 2-hour video call earlier this week. It started this way, Congressman.
Hello.
Добрый день.
Good to see you again.
What do you make of that intro, and what should be the U.S. response to address Russia's posture with Ukraine? Sanctions only, or something more here?
Well, I think the big takeaway in all this is when you project weakness from the Oval Office, bad people around the planet do bad things. And we saw this months ago. I point to this example all the time because it was so telling to me. When Secretary of State Blinken was in Anchorage meeting with his Chinese counterpart, and our side is on one side of the table and the Chinese counterparts on the other side, and the dress down, the lecture that the Secretary of State of the United States received from China, calling us racist and everything else, there is no way, Raymond, there is no way that would happen to Mike Pompeo in a President Trump administration. It just wouldn't, because President Trump projects strength. And he actually gave, in Ukraine example, he gave them Javelin missiles when Obama was giving them MREs and blankets.
Before we run out of time, I want to talk about your latest book, Do What You Said You'd Do. You write that your biggest regret was not repealing the Affordable Care Act when Republicans had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House.
Yeah.
Why didn't that happen? And what will Republicans do should they regain control of the House and possibly the Senate? You know, everybody says, oh, Republicans are going to win. The question is, what would you do if you win?
Yeah, no, great point. Well, when we win I think we're going to win in 11 months. I think we will be back in power in January of 2023. Joe Biden will still be the president, so it's going to be tough to pass legislation. But we're going to have to hold the appropriators responsible, to account, and make sure that we don't fund the crazy things that the Democrats want to fund, and we fight for a couple key specific policies in those appropriation bills. That will be our only leverage. But the main thing we can do when we win back power is to do the oversight that the Constitution requires us to do. To what we write about it, what I wrote about in the book on that specific chapter, we should have on January 20th, 2017, passed the legislation that we had passed in the previous Congress. Instead, Paul Ryan had this 3-bucket plan, which was ridiculous. We should have focused on passing what we had already done, that the American people sent us here to do, pass that, and then moved right into cutting taxes. Instead, he introduced this crazy plan that we knew was the wrong plan, that wasn't really going to bring down premiums, and we went into this long fight. I detail that issue in the book and a host of other stories that I think will take your viewers behind the scenes and give them a real sense of how Congress operates in some of those key fights.
It's an ugly sight, I have to say, Congressman, seeing the machinations and the way this stuff moves, you know, and again, Paul Ryan had those 3 buckets. The voters kicked all of those buckets over, I'm afraid. Before we run out of time, the 49-year-old man arrested for setting Fox's tree in New York afire in Manhattan has already been released on bail. He claims he didn't do it. This was clearly an act of public vandalism, potentially very dangerous. Your thoughts? And we're seeing a rash of these things. In D.C., there's a statue of the Virgin Mary. Her nose was knocked off. Her hand was taken off right on the university, Catholic university grounds. What's happening here?
Democrats have legitimate. I mean, when you defund the police, you shouldn't be surprised when you get. You spend an entire summer, as Democrats did in 2020, saying that rioters and looters are actually peaceful protesters. You shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. So the only answer is to elect Republicans, elect conservatives who are going to stand up for the rule of law and stand up for common sense, for goodness sake. So this is what happens when the left gets control. And I spend a time on this in the book, where we talk about the radical left and how they're different today than the true liberals of just a decade ago who believed in the First Amendment, who believed in the Constitution. Today's left, the biggest concern I have is today's left doesn't believe in the First Amendment free speech rights that we have. They don't. They say, if you don't agree with me, you're not allowed to talk. And if you try, Raymond, they're going to call you a racist and try to cancel you. That is frightening. So this is today's left. And when you have that mindset out there, you get what we're now seeing in our streets. It's frightening, but the only remedy is to elect people who will do what they say they would do and get here and fight for the things the American people truly believe in and make our country a special place.
Congressman Jim Jordan, I thank you for being here. And the Congressman's book, Do What You Said You'd Do, Fighting for Freedom in the Swamp, is available at bookstores everywhere. Thanks again.
Thank you.
She's the 4-time Emmy-winning former co-host of NBC's Today Show, probably best known as the co-host of Live with Regis and Kathie Lee. She's author of a new book, The Jesus I Know, Honest Conversations and Diverse Opinions About Who He Is. I sat down with her recently in Tennessee to talk about faith, her life, her amazing career. Here's part 2 of my interview with Kathie Lee Gifford. I want to circle back with Regis about the secret of this relationship that you all had. And just doing this so long, I have to ask the question because I've always wanted to know. Did you clear topics in the morning? You never called or talked before the show?
Ever.
Never?
We never saw each other before the show on purpose.
You came in, did your makeup in separate rooms,
in separate
and hit
rooms,
the floor together.
And showed up at the same time and not knowing what the other person was going to talk about or anything. We never had a writer.
There was no intro script, nothing.
No.
For that whole segment.
No, we were a local piece of slime show and proud of it. That's what we called ourselves, the local piece of slime show. We were a local show, and we wanted to stay that way. We made a pact when we signed, and I joined him on the local show. It's called The Morning Show in New York at WABC. We said, Regis, we made a pact. We'll never go national. We'll never be syndicated unless they just put us up on a satellite and we get to be us. If the suits come along and think they can make something that's working beautifully better, and basically they ruin it. It's like politics. They've got a better way to scramble an egg.
But they didn't mess with you all.
Because we wouldn't do it. We refused to sign until they said, okay. They wanted Regis to get rid of the New York papers.
Yeah, he would hold up
the
the
He said
papers.
no.
Yeah.
And everybody's watching from around the world go, oh, it's the New York papers.
Right.
The very thing that worked, they were trying to make us more, accessible. No, let us be who we are. Let us talk to one another. Let us razz one another.
Right.
Let me be able to say, oh, Reg, and him go, do you believe this woman? And it worked. And when I first started with him, we went for like 6 minutes for our opening or something like that. Within weeks, within months, we were 23 minutes.
Wow, was it that
of
long?
Talking to one another before one commercial break, without any writers at all. Never had a writer till the day that I left the show.
Wow. Let me ask you about that. Why did you leave the show? Really? Why did you leave the show?
Because I'm an artist. I was not a talk show host by nature. I'm an artist. and my dreams of writing films and being in films and acting in films and writing
And
music.
musicals.
And I was writing, by that time I had done Broadway,
Yep.
a Sondheim show, and it was life transforming for me. I'd turned down Broadway before when Julie Andrews had asked me to take over for her in Victor Victoria.
Victor Victoria. Why did you turn that down?
Because my daughter was 1.
Oh, too little.
I told Mary Poppins, I can't. My daughter's 1, and she'll never be 1 again. And she said,
Wow.
Kathie, I respect that. I had to make those kinds of choices when my children were young too. And she goes, you'll never regret choosing your children. She said, the times you don't are the ones you regret. And I knew that. By the time Carol Burnett asked me to do the Sondheim thing with her,
Putting it together.
you've done it.
I saw it. I'm not doing my homework. I saw it. I also saw Scandalous. How many people can say that?
My Broadway show that I wrote and
which
produced.
was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. That was Tony nominated.
I know.
It lasted 3 weeks, and then the hurricane and some people that hate Jesus on Broadway made sure it didn't go any further. That took me 13 years.
I don't
to
know
bring
how
to
you even mounted that show because of the content. I thought, how did she get that here?
Well,
how did she get it here? I knew they were going to come after it when I saw it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, and it's a conflict. It's not exactly, I mean, this isn't the Mother Teresa story. I mean,
no,
this is a woman
was
with
blood
conflicts
and guts and warts. And I said, that's what the Bible is all about. Bible doesn't clean up people's stories.
Right.
It tells them the only perfect life you'll ever find in the Bible is the only one that's ever been lived, and that's Jesus. Everybody else.
And look what they did to him.
And look what they did to him.
What they did to your Broadway show. But
then again, it's still, I mean, it was Tony nominated.
Yep.
And Carol Lee Carmello should have won the Tony that year.
She was really good.
Not to put down anybody else's performance, but she gave the most powerful performance I've ever seen a woman give on Broadway.
So you left Kathie Lee and Regis and Kathie Lee. I always.
I
know you like that billing. You left that show because you wanted to pursue these other.
That was the main reason, because I knew I was running out of. I was bored. I was in a velvet rut, making a fortune.
15 years.
15 years with Regis. We started out with nothing, and we became the hottest thing. We changed the whole landscape of daytime television forever after that. Nobody had ever done that before.
Right.
You know, just show up and talk.
Right.
And they did it on radio, but they'd never done it on television.
No.
And it just caught on because it was real. Right. The reason that the Lord, I think, took him home when he did, and he was just shy of his 88th birthday.
Yeah, 89th.
89th, yeah, that's right. Because I always time it because of Frank's. Frank had been, well, anyway, it was last summer. It was July of last summer, and they were in town. They had sold their home, and they were living in California. But when they came, once in a while, we'd always get together, So I said, come to my house. I'm home because I live in Tennessee now. But come, I'm home too. Let's have lunch. So they showed up, and I was standing at my front door to welcome them, and I saw him get out of the car, and I knew it would be the last time I'd see him. And he had just faded since I'd seen him in January in California.
Right, for an award ceremony, which you told me about last time.
That's
you were on
right,
the show.
sweetie. That's right.
So but tell me, and you said the Lord took him home. Why? Why at that time?
He was sad. He couldn't be Regis anymore. Regis lived to make people happy.
He did.
He would, every time he was out, he'd go, hello, Regis is here. Hey, hey. And he'd go up to you. What's your story? You're a tall one. What'd you eat when you were a kid? Too much broccoli. And he'd do his shtick.
Yeah.
And he loved to do it. He lived for it. We could go into the quietest little restaurant in Greenwich, Connecticut, where we both lived. I go, we're going to have such a nice night. And he'd walk in going, that's right, Regis is here. Look what we brought. And I'm going, hey.
You're a guest in your own restaurant.
And he'd go from drag me to every table to say hello to people. And he loved the love.
He did.
He loved the love. And when he couldn't do that anymore, and he couldn't be Regis, and he couldn't even people couldn't recognize him because he's wearing a mask. So if he was out, they didn't know him. And then he couldn't even go to lunch in California because it was locked down with his friends and at least reminisce.
He didn't have that contact
They were all dying.
Anymore.
Don Rickles was dying. And one of his closest friends died of COVID a few months before Regis died. And he just never was the same after that. But we had lunch that day, and then he died, and I was flying back again to the Lord said, get on a plane and go home. From Tennessee back. And I'd been there home 2 weeks before. And I went, why, Lord? I get on the plane, I land, and my friend had called me and said, I'm so sorry about your friend Regis. And I
no.
But that meant I was there with Joy and the girls.
I have to say, the joy you brought so many people through that show. You continue to do it, but that was really special. And I ran into Regis only one time, and it was when he was doing a stint, I think, at Fox Sports.
Oh, he was miserable.
He was
there.
miserable.
He
and
was
I
miserable.
and you know, and I saw him. I was watching the monitor. I was coming out of makeup, and I watched the monitor. I said, "Oh my gosh, Regis is here." Well, he had nothing to do. It was like he was
there.
chained, sitting.
Yeah.
Well, when he came off the set,
There's
I waited
Regis.
for him, and I said, "Regis, I'm Raymond Arroyo." "Oh my God, I know exactly who you are. What are you doing here?" And he was like,
he could be him.
He was himself.
See
and
what
I
I
thought
mean?
we should take him to the set and just let him loose.
Let him loose.
It was, yeah.
He was the greatest storyteller ever.
He was amazing.
Ever.
Amazing.
And he was always humble about it. He was like, can you believe I'm sitting here? I've got like Robert De Niro. It's Robert frickin' De Niro. You know, he gave everybody else permission to be, that's Robert De Niro.
And to have a great time.
And he was so kind to people.
Now, a few years ago, you moved to Nashville.
Yes.
Outside of Nashville.
Yes.
Why?
Because I was dying.
In Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. I was dying of loneliness. I was dying of lack of community, lack of a place to worship the way I couldn't find a church in my area that taught rabbinically, and so I could sit there week after week after week and hear bad theology and then music based on bad theology, and it would break my heart. So I started going to Israel a couple of times or 3 times a year just so I could study with rabbinic teachers and get my heart filled. But my creative juices were not fulfilled until I came here. I had written a movie for my friend.
Done everything now.
But I'd just written a movie at that time for my friend Craig Ferguson.
Right.
And I wanted to shoot it in the Highlands with him. It was totally based on I adore him. And I was co-writing all the music with one of the greatest writers in the business who lived down here, still does, Brett James, brilliant writer. And we were writing the entire soundtrack together. So I came for a solid year. At least once a month, sometimes every weekend as we got
So
closer.
that's when you
That's when I realized,
flavor.
oh my gosh, why am I so happy here? So I bought a little house, little pied-à-terre, thinking I'll have a foot in the door here just to get away.
Yeah.
I was here for less than a month, and I said, Mama's got to move. Mama needs literally, I was dying of loneliness.
Yeah.
One of the first lines in the movie I'd written was about a woman who was she was a widow, and she's talking to her husband's ashes, and she goes, I love you, Fred, and I always will. But I got to make new memories, or the old ones are going to kill me. I'm not ready to die yet, not yet.
Yep.
And that's exactly where I was at. I'm not ready to die yet. This 6 years later since Frank has passed. And I'm more alive today than I've been in years and years and years.
I mean, you're writing new music. You recorded, you released a single with Alveda King.
Yes.
I mean, you've got...
That's just because I showed up at the studio.
Oh.
I had nothing to do with it.
I thought you gave up singing 17 years ago.
With Brett, I had 3 number ones on iTunes.
Right.
I've just written one with these guys called Lewis York that's going to be a huge, huge song on the R&B charts.
Okay, so stop.
I mean, it's all going craziness.
Okay, so how is this retiring from singing, which you said you did 17
I'm not on
years
the
ago.
recording. I wrote it with them.
I know, but you've recorded since then.
Oh, yeah, lots of stuff. My voice has come back. My voice has come back like crazy.
Wow.
I'm a maniac.
And you retired because you said you weren't going to sing because of scarring from pneumonia?
I had scar tissue from pneumonia when my father was dying.
Wow.
And that was 20-some years ago, 25 years ago now. And I didn't sing for 15 years professionally till Brett got me to. Huh. And I sang a song that we wrote together, the first one called He Saw Jesus, about Frank's
Beautiful
passing.
song.
And that changed everything. So the Lord really used him in my life in a beautiful way, not just to get my career on a different trajectory, but also to bring me physically out of, there's a scripture that says, Lord, you led me into a spacious place. And that's what I feel like. I mean, if you trust the Lord in every season of your life, every season. I feel 30 years old. I am a couple of 30s and then some.
Oh, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, but I feel so young. I feel so joyful. I feel so inspired. Because we don't retire, we refire, as I said. And I'm just tired of being the cover girl for the AARP. Can they please get, Shirley, Kristen Chenoweth, somebody.
After our last interview, I had more widows write me letters saying how inspirational you are to them.
Yeah.
Because so many people, widows or widowers, they close up the life as they close up
their heart
and the house and the memories. Because as you said, the memories kill you. You hold on to them and they kill you. What have you learned during this period? And what would you advise others who are in similar situations?
It's kind of an easy question because things change in our lives every day. Things change in our world every day. But Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And God Almighty is everlasting to everlasting to everlasting. So don't be afraid of change. It can also be your great friend. And embrace it. Because the God who took care of you yesterday and all those years before is not going to start not showing up for you now, you know. And God has led me to not only a new home, but a new relationship that I'm very, very happy in, a new future in my life, a new career, a new everything. Behold, I do a new thing.
I make all things new.
Do you not perceive it?
Yeah.
I make all things new. Do you not see it?
Yeah.
I bring the wasteland to be a garden and streams of living water to the desert. He'll do that in our lives too, not just metaphorically, actually. Actually, and he'll make our old bones young again.
The Jesus I know, what did you learn from the experience? And what do you want others to apprehend? Because it's a lot of searchers. It's not people who know what you know.
There are nobody's got everything tied up with a bow at the end.
No. Some of these stories end kind of
abruptly.
Yeah.
Some of them are, you can see they're in the works now. I included every concern people have, every still unanswered question, because that's where they're at in their walk. I'm not going to manipulate their truth. You know, we do that all the time in our culture now.
Yeah.
It's called inconvenient truth, so we manipulate it to fit our narrative. I just let people talk, let them share, and I try to love them like I've tried to love them privately in their lives. Give them a platform to tell their stories. I'm hoping this book is going to touch so many people's lives that they're not finished yet either. But there's no hurry.
The Jesus I Know, honest conversations and diverse opinions about who he is by Kathie Lee Gifford is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Before we go, I want to congratulate and bring your attention to a brand new Diocesan Performing Arts Center. It's actually installed in Brooklyn, in the Diocese of Brooklyn, above Saints Peter and Paul Church. Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio recently inaugurated the center. It's called the Emmaus Center for the Arts. It's actually a renovated 600-seat former opera house, one of the first in Brooklyn. The new center, it is hoped, will be a beacon of culture and evangelization. They'll feature concerts and films and screenings and much more. Congratulations to them. It's just the sort of thing I think Brooklyn needs. That's a very artistic community. It's you can find more information at emmausbrooklyn.org. That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.
To order this episode of The World Over from the EWTN Religious Catalog web store, log on to EWTNRC.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or call 1-800-854-6316.
Some of the more popular items on the RC show this month are 3-day votive candles, perfect for the Christmas season. Each design is exclusive to EWTN and includes a beautiful corresponding prayer. Bring the light of the world into your home or share them as gifts. The more you buy, the more you save. To order, go to EWTNRC.com and search for 3-day votive candle to see the collection.
Coronavirus vaccine mandates. The Senate votes against the Biden administration. We're on Capitol Hill.